Museum for the annual Holt and Smithson Foundation Lecture Series. The Holt and Smithson Foundation Annual Lecture Series is a 10-year program that invites artists, writers, and thinkers to extend the creative legacies of Nancy Holt and Robert Smithson. Each year of the series, the Holt and Smithson Foundation partners with a different organization to present this program. This is the second annual lecture, and we are thrilled to be partnering on this amazing slate of programming that we have for you today. Today's program is special to the New Mexico Museum of Art because it is the first program that we are presenting in honor of the opening of our second location, the Black and Contemporary, which will open later this year. In the inaugural exhibition, Shadow and Light, we will feature 3 artworks by Nancy Holt, which is how this collaborative program came to be. I want to thank Lisa Le Feuvre, Executive Director of the Holt and Smithson Foundation, for partnering with us on this program. Today's program will start with a presentation by DesertArtLAB, which will conclude shortly after 12 p.m. There will be a break, and we will reconvene for the afternoon session with doors opening at 1:15 p.m., and the program will start at 1:30 again. For the afternoon session, there will be a presentation by our keynote speaker, Rebecca Solnit. Following Solnit's presentation, she will be joined in conversation by Lippard, with Lisa Le Feuvre as chair. The afternoon session will conclude shortly before 3 p.m., so we hope you can come back and join us this afternoon. Now to introduce our presenters for this morning, DesertArtLAB. DesertArtLAB is an interdisciplinary environmental art collaborative co-directed by April Bohorquitz and Matt Garcia, who are based in Pueblo, Colorado. Their work promotes indigenous Chicanic perspectives on ecological practice, food sovereignty, self-determination, and climate change. DesertArtLAB's projects activate public space through participatory artworks and support the restoration of desert environments and their foodways through zero irrigation rigor projects. Please welcome April and Matt of DesertArtLAB.
And we're honored to be here today to share our work with you all. We also don't often get a chance to present together.
Usually it's just one of us that does these events.
We're lucky. Yeah, I'm excited to both be here today.
We want to kind of share the origins of our organization, our practice, DesertArtLAB. We started this practice in Phoenix, Arizona. And Phoenix, Arizona is often known for kind of the suburban abyss, kind of expanding urban metropolitan area. It's also known as kind of a Sun Belt area, golfing, the Fiesta Bowl. But at the time we started this project, this was kind of a reality for us. In central Phoenix, over 10 years ago when we started this, 65% of the urban core was stripped vacant lots. And for us, we saw this conversation about this concept of the desert developing in these zones, and the desert as kind of this concept that is kind of a wasteland. But we also knew there was more to it. Healthy deserts are some of the most biodiverse regions in the world. There's histories of ecological and food practice going back hundreds and hundreds of years. And so we were interested in, how did we get here? How did we get to this wasteland? And where was this in the conversation? Where was this history? Where was this story in conversations about things like sustainability in the desert? And so that's how it started. That was the concept of DesertArtLAB meetings.
So in 2010, as in an effort to kind of create this conversation through performance art, we decided to create these individual planting performances of cactus in vacant spaces.
And when we And so the idea was, how do we return native ecology back to these stripped urban zones? And when we started, it was kind of us against, this kind of stripped landscape. And as artists, we were exhibiting this stuff locally. And what we found was interesting. Folks would come up to us and say, I want to plant a cactus. Can I plant one? Where would I get one of those to plant? And we thought, well, that's interesting. People are interested in this. They want to participate. They want to be a part of this discussion through action.
And we also realized that because as individuals, just the two of us could only plant so many cactus alone.
And really, that was the point of those initial performances, that struggle. But as we found interest in it, our practice changed. And what we did is we had an exhibition at kind of one of the big local art spaces in the central Phoenix area, right in those zones that are stripped. And all we had in this space was cacti stacked on pedestals. And we offered these cacti to the public with one request, that they perform a cactus planting performance as well in vacant urban space.
And so in exchange, we also asked them to send us any documentation and the coordinates of where they planted the cactus.
And so this for us was kind of the official launching of DesertArtLAB. This was probably in 2010, 2011. I mean, there might be some people in this audience that were there. Yeah. And again, this was part of a Phoenix First Friday thing. You walk into the gallery, there's nothing on walls. This is one of those things where at this time it was very popular. You have tens of thousands of people really coming into the space, and this was a really well-known space that always had kind of dynamic work, and nothing was there. And so it was a kind of a fun gesture to what is art and how can we transform these spaces. So over the course of the next several weeks, people started sending their performances back to us and coordinates of their plantings. And so all these images that we're sharing with you now are not ours. They're participants in the project. Some went in and planted it in the grass. Some made maps. Had their families join. This one is really special because the first image was the initial image from the project we did, and the second next to it was a year later.
So this person actually was returning to the site of their cactus and documenting its growth and its health.
You're talking Phoenix, Arizona, 115 degrees. People think nothing grows there. Yeah. Well, the raccoons do, the native flora. And again, this is in a city median here. Then we came back. So this was over 10 years ago. So this was the early days, and all this stuff was shared through social media. This is the early days of social media. It was really interesting because this was the early time of a decade ago of the concept of viral, the concept of even being able to geotag things on maps, public maps. And so all this stuff we geotagged in Google Maps, so we could kind of revisit the health of these things. And what we found what was interesting is as the years went on, as the weeks went on, some of them didn't make it. And I don't have the image in here, unfortunately, but some of them were destroyed. Somebody got some sort of object and just damaged the plant and destroyed it.
Or sometimes we returned to, since we had the coordinates of the plantings, we were able to return and visit some of these cactus, and we would find them that they were run over by a bike or a car. And so we started to, for us that was all really interesting.
We distributed about 80 cacti in this project.
And as a result of that, we were invited to participate in a community event. There was a local arts organization that was trying to build a garden in a historic barrio in Central Phoenix. And so we thought, well, we have the perfect idea for our garden for this community. We're going to create a cactus garden. We don't need irrigation. The people in this community eat this plant, so it makes perfect sense.
And to establish it, we choreographed a mass cacti planting performance. So with this project, about 100 community, and this is in one of those vacant lots you saw from those early maps. We had about 100 participants come out and we literally choreographed the digging of our holes in this degraded earth. And if anybody's ever dug in degraded, desertified earth, it's like rock. And we called it Hills to Freedom.
So there's our cactus.
At the end of the day of this really kind of beautiful event, we were feeling pretty good about ourselves. It worked, it was interesting, and at the end of the day we were kind of cleaning up and an individual drives up onto the plot, gets out, and he's the owner of the plot. And now we've been working with a community group that had been interfacing with him, we were, but he gets out and he says...
and he gave us permission.
Yeah,
he gave the
yeah.
organization permission to build
do the
the garden and all this stuff.
But he gets out of the car and he says, "What's this cactus doing on my property?" And we kind of started explaining it. He's like, "I want this off of my property. I don't want this anywhere near me. I want this out of here." And this was, as artists, we think, we're learning from our practice, and we think, well, this was interesting. We weren't too discouraged about it. We didn't remove the cactus. Say that. We let him do it. But there was obviously this like native ecology was stigmatized. It was hated in its own environment. And so then we started having we started digging into that as artists and started kind of exploring what does that mean? What is that? Where's that coming from?
And really we were kind of also connecting this to our other findings from the planting performances, where we would see that actually the cactus that didn't survive weren't surviving because of the climate.
The harsh environment.
The harsh environment wasn't necessarily climatic, but it was starting to seem like it was social.
And we also, because that project started running into the limits of physical space, so we created this project called the Mobile Eco Studio, which was an attempt to kind of bring this conversation to the community through a mobile tool. And I'll play it through.
Common in a lot of communities in central and urban Phoenix. And what was so fun about this project was people are used to approaching these carts because they're selling candy and snacks and all sorts of yummy stuff. And as we were driving through the neighborhoods, we would have all these kids come out with their dollar bills, like, stop, I want something. And then we were able to use the bike and this space as a platform to engage intergenerational communities in a conversation about desert food practice and sustainability. And it's been such a fun experience too.
And in a lot of cases, these communities that we're working with know more about desert food practice than us. They've been doing it. And so what it became was really a stage for, I mean, the parents would come out because they'd be like, there's not candy over there, there's mud, and there's cactus, what's going on? And then they would be like, well, this is how you cut the cactus, this is how you know, so it became a stage to have this group conversation about what it means to honor this food practice and belong in a desert region.
And so we have, through the Mobile Eco Studio, we also were able to distribute cactus pads to community members to plant. Most of them, again, familiar with the food practice. And then also engage them in creating these seed bombs with desert restorative seed mixes that they could, again, throw into spaces in their communities that were often surrounded by vacant, urban, decayed land.
At this time also we started moving a little outside of the Phoenix area. We started kind of studying the concept of the desert, the history of the desert, and it easily, quickly takes you into the region of the Southwest United States. And this is a map of John Wesley Powell's arid regions of the United States presented to the U.S. Senate in 1890. And this was pretty important for us because as we started to kind of move outside of the Phoenix area, we found that these conversations were really relevant throughout the Southwest. And in some cases, these establishing kind of research documents about the Southwest kind of illustrate the kind of limits of water in the entire region. So this is, if you look right here, it says eastern boundary of arid region, and then this kind of line goes into a little below the San Francisco Bay Area right here. And of course, we started here in Arizona, and we'll talk about where we moved on from there. But through this process, we started really kind of thinking about what is the desert ecologically, culturally. Here's a map of the Great American Desert. So for a period of time, if you look right here, you can see the Arkansas River. You can see the kind of Texas Gulf, and right here, the edge of Texas and the Gulf of Mexico. If you come straight up here, you're going through the eastern slope of the Rocky Mountains. And you can see the Arkansas River here, Denver, Colorado would be right over here. Where we're at, Pueblo would be kind of right here. So for a period of time, this was referred to as the Great American Desert. Here's another map.
This is a map by Stephen H. Long, and this map is also really interesting. You can see here that, and this map is from 1823. This area is here in the Rocky Mountains. This is at the Great American Desert as well. What's also interesting about this map is some of the comments that were inscribed on the map. You can see here that up at the top, it says the Great Desert is frequented by roving bands of Indians who have no place or a residence, but roam from place to place in quest of game. And so here we're starting to see how the Great American is being labeled as foreign, as dangerous, as unknown.
This is a map of the Mexican Republic. And again, if you look right here, we're talking about that Great American Desert Zone is about right here. This is, again, I keep referencing the Arkansas River because that's where we're at right now in Pueblo, and I'll show that. Here's the Arkansas River. So this starts to show the political borders and how they align with the so-called ecological borders. This is a map of demographics. So this is Hispanic plurality in the Southwest going through, you can see see Santa Fe with Pueblos right up there. You see the darker regions are concentrations of Hispanic residents. Here's another map of that. You can see the Arkansas River right here, and it's kind of like cultural border still. And so this all starts to kind of layer onto the work that we're doing when we're thinking about deserts as ecological space, as cultural space as well. And then this also speaks to kind of the histories of communities who have been living in the Southwest before it was the U.S. And before, in some cases, it was called a desert. This is another important map for us. The 100th meridian, the kind of mythological line between the east and the west, which divides the precipitation between one part of the country that has higher precipitation and the other that is a little bit lower. And you can see, again, there's Arizona. You can see, of course, you know how dry Arizona is. That's kind of more well known. If we come over here, you see this white section right here. We're in southern Colorado, Pueblo, Colorado. We're right on this river, very area. And then we'd like to show this research out of Yale on that 100th meridian. So this is the 100th meridian. If you follow this, you'll just let it replay to get to 1980, 2000, today. That 100th meridian, as you see, is spreading. So we say, oh. Well, and for us, DesertArtLAB, this is what we would say the desert is expanding. For us in DesertArtLAB, this is an opportunity to explore and engage these concepts that are really, in some cases, ignored or discounted. So as artists, what we decided to do, based on that first kind of set of art practice that really taught us a lot about where we were headed, we knew we needed. As DesertArtLAB expanded, knowledge links to ecologies are more important than ever. So what we wanted to do is create an ecological installation as an edible landscape on Eric's creative land. And remember, we tried to do that, and it got taken away. So we knew in order to do this, we really needed our own space, because you can imagine to try to grow in desert it takes time. And so this is where we moved to Pueblo. And I'm from there. But this is where Pueblo is the conversation. You can see this is the Arkansas River that came up often on those maps right here. See Pueblo, La Junta, Lamar. This project was supported by Creative Capital, and I would like to throw that out because they're wonderful. It's an organization that really does support artists to do big things, dreams, and they supported us.
And through their support and with what we learned earlier, we realized we needed to purchase land in order to complete the project that we were imagining. And so with the Creative Capital support, we were able to do that.
And the challenge for us was we were looking for the most degraded, beat-up piece of land you could find, which, believe it or not, wasn't that hard. But there was certain things that, we look back now and I think, I don't know if we'd be able to find this very piece anywhere else. So it seemed, they're everywhere. But as we got into it and as we worked now, we realized this was the spot. So you can see it. This is it. It was actually a road. So the space that we decided to work on was being used as a road. As beat up as a piece of earth can possibly be. This was our initial concept, or design for the concept. To establish this site, we had local indigenous elders and leaders come in and perform a blessing for the planting of our first plant, which was a cholla cactus, is what you see right there.
And we, through this, we realized in order to really engage our traditional knowledge systems, we are returning back to what we've learned and what we know. And so we decided, yes, we have to have a ceremony and bless the land and bless the plants before we begin. you can see our son, who is now much older than that, who's planting the first cactus there.
Usually at these presentations, when he's here, I have him stand up and big now.
He's almost taller than me.
And that kind of speaks to the project, that it's slow, it takes time, and we are growing with it, and in some cases, well. So this was about year 3, that's our daughter. And we established plantings with cholla cactus, and there's a reason cholla cactus we didn't have soil, we didn't bring soil. So the concept we were working with is that these plants can heal the earth. So when we started to plant, the earth here, let me just kind of, if I can show some images here, well, I'll get some. But the earth here, it was a road, so it was we thought we would move harder from our time in Arizona. We had not seen the earth this hard, even where we worked, and we went through many different kinds of tools to get into the earth, from jackhammer to basically tractor augers. We broke tractor augers. And then the final thing is I was working with a machine rental place, and they were, how do you break this kind of thing? And I told them, and they were like, okay, you need a jackhammer. And so really to get into the earth, we had to jackhammer bolts, or with the time frame we had, we were able to get these plants in the earth. And that was important. We didn't bring any soil in. The thing about the cholla is they can live in that earth. They're very resilient plants that return organic material back to the earth, back to the soil. So there was no soil at that time.
And another thing to mention is we also don't bring any outside water, so the plants grow with only the natural occurring precipitation, which can change from year to year, but it's really not that much.
So the establishment of this site, we had a student fellowship along with it, so we had college students help us initially kind of survey the land, catalog artifacts that we found on the land. We really wanted to think about what it was as a change. The product of that work, this is kind of an example of the artifacts. A lot of car parts. A lot of car parts and liquor bottles.
Yep.
And these actually were part of an exhibition that went on here.
Actually, it was curated by Andrea Hadley, who's in here today.
This was an important show because it really brought that non-traditional fieldwork-based practice into a formal space, and it was just an exciting opportunity, and it really helped us as artists kind of think about how this work can exist in two spaces, or not. But here's some images of those cactus going in. We had to construct a barrier because otherwise this had been used as a road for generations, so people knew it as a road, so there needed to be something so no one drove over it. And so as we were developing it, people kept driving over it. And it looked as if they were trying to destroy it. It's just there was a road there forever, so no one really realized. So as we developed it, we needed some sort of barrier to keep the cars out. And this is the site from Google Earth. It took about 4 years for finally get on Google Earth. We were very excited. But this is 2021. This is 2016 when we started the initial plantings. And this is very slow. The statement about that really, you only see soil in this, and there's a reason. There's no soil. So you look for it 7 years now, believe it or not, there's soil. So the cholla has worked the earth to the point where now we can try to plant other flora. At this time, there was few things that would survive in cholla, and that's what cholla are just such an important plant in the high desert ecosystem for so many reasons. But most importantly, they're also hated, and so this was also an important space for us to elevate these plants, to elevate the conversation about what it means to have a relationship with your indigenous desert ecology. And so that's what this space is about also. They're edible. And this was also important to our choice in starting, because there's a food practice that goes back to the millennium that rely on soya. So this is, again, what is the food of the Southwest? What is the food of the drylands? This is it, the soya.
And what was also interesting about this process was that the neighbors, everyone came out and thought it was really funny that we were trying to grow things in this land, and they all warned us, you can't, nothing grows here. They were certain, it's dead. They thought, oh, how cute, they're gonna try and grow something. And so it's been great because over the last 6 years, we've been able to show, that actually you can grow things. Things will grow here.
And the vision of this project is it's a time, and that speaks to the time-based component of the project. Something like this is decades, and we are a few years into it, 7 years. So we're at the very beginning, and every year that it changes, the work changes and the engagement changes, and that is part of the project.
I think it was also important to think about what are we growing in this space? What's actually growing here if you make space for it and allow for it to grow? And
there was, and quite literally, we had been at DesertArtLAB traveling through the Southwest doing our projects. We didn't find much space to have these conversations. We didn't come across physical space where these kind of conversations could live. And so that was also what this was about. It was to have a living, growing space where conversations like this could exist. And we could see it. We could see these conversations, not just happen. And that's where this site is right now. And but why cactus?
And so if you're not familiar with cactus as a food source, in the Americas, it's been a food source. It's been a source of food, medicine, toxicants, yes, for hundreds, if not thousands of years. In the United States, too, it is hard for us to access some of these foods commercially, and also with the natural space, because a lot of natural space is either private or owned by a municipality or the state or the federal government. And so having that space that allows us to engage with these food systems was really important.
Well, the other thing I would mention about the build site, it's an urban space, and that's important to the project. Sometimes the so-called wilderness is separated from the urban communities, and we really wanted this to be centered in an urban space to have this conversation about ecology right in the center of desert community. But why cactus? It's a pretty significant plant. You need it, intoxicant.
This is a map of the North land, so we also know it as Mexico City. And this was also named the place of cactus.
So the mythologies and the connection to civilization in America is cactus. And this is incredibly important as we think about what the Southwest is and what it's been.
And the Americas. So here's a couple of pictures of tacos, cactus tacos, tacos in a fog. We have some images here of a cactus market where they're preparing the cactus to deliver to different food markets.
As we started this project, we really felt like the food practice types of cactus is really like it's the tip of the iceberg into a 1,000-year-old cultural and ecological practice. And that's where we started, was eating the cactus, because that really is kind of a staple.
And for us, it was something that we grew up with. It's something that we learned from our great-grandmothers. Here we also have a couple of images of some foods that we created using the different cactus, granita, and Gelita chips. Gelita is a wild green that grows in the high desert, also known as transporter, and it grows pretty prolifically with very little water, only again the natural occurring precipitation.
It's seen as a weed, so this is one of those kind of it's seen as a weed. Now we're going to get into some of the other work that we kind of generated from. So we grow all this stuff. So the Gelita is all this stuff we grow. And that's a big part. So when we get to the next body of work, we grow the flora that we work with.
These are some large-scale cyanotypes that we have created a couple of years ago with the support of Colorado College and their some melon funding. But here we have an image of myself with some of the plants that we grow, the Gelita, the lamb's quarter, the chimiza, different plants from our studio. And what we were exploring here is this idea of concentric ecologies. It's something that a scholar, an indigenous scholar, Rebecca Solnit, writes about. And it's this concept that we are connected to our ecological systems. They are extended relations to us. And so kind of utilizing that concept, and we created these images where we were literally connected to these plants that are seen as kin, as cousins, as part of your community.
And this project was in development for many years, but we couldn't really get to the point to actually execute it until we had enough plants that we could use. And so it took us about 6 years to grow the plants that ended up becoming part of the cyanotype process. And we were, exploring early examples of botanical studies, and cyanotype is tied to that. The early work of Ann Atkins, who studied native algae in England. And we wanted to connect. One thing we felt as artists we wanted to bring was the body. This is, I also wanted to share, you saw the mobile eco studio at the beginning, and this is it now. So, with these kind of projects, the mobile eco studio, we always had the dream of it being what it is in this photo, but we didn't have the resources when we started that project. So we had the concept, but artistically we didn't have the funds to make it what we wanted it to be. And as artists, I also teach, and I try to share this with my students, and we decided I wasn't going to wait until I had the resources to make it everything I wanted it to be. We were going to execute the concept and then let the project continue. And it took us 10 years to finish this project. And this is where it is right now. And this again was with the support of residency through Colorado College that helped us to support the creation of this. And what you see here in this is a reference to Chicano culture. Dayton's, Candy's paint, and that's part of what we as artists and our perspective brings to the conversation about environmental art, land art, sustainability. Where are we in it? And that's what this project speaks. We want to share an example of another community performance that we did in Pueblo, Colorado.
And so this performance is called Agua y Tierra, and we worked with the local Ballet Poporico dance group to choreograph a planting performance, trying to connect our traditional dances back to our ecological practices. A lot of traditional dances are based on ecological practices. However, we've kind of lost the connection to the actual practice, the ecological practices. And so through, again, the support of Colorado College, we were able to create this performance. We had two groups of dancers. We had water dancers and land dancers. And the water dancers went down. Our site is located on a butte just above the Arkansas or the Nepesta River. So our water dancers danced by the river and brought water up to the site while the land dancers prepared the spaces for new plants to be planted. And so we'll share a little clip of that.
It looks like it's frozen here, so I'll just kind of scan through so you can see some images, and maybe it'll start filling. So that's the Arkansas River, so it's right below our field site. There. And if anybody's familiar with water rights in Colorado, the water that falls on when it rains, the water that falls on your roof is not yours. It's not. It's owned by someone else. So there was a real kind of battle in our legislature for folks who wanted water collection barrels. And they passed a rule that they were illegal up until about 4 or 5 years ago. And now if you get one, you can have one water collection barrel by law. And it's not your water.
Who owns the water?
I don't know. You know, yeah, I don't know. The water. So the water is all owned by different folks with the water rights. Yeah. So we were taking the water from the Nepesta, not the Arkansas. But this also presents with an attempt to kind of speak to the generational practice. And that's really what the project is about. This project probably, it's very likely it won't even finish in our lifetime. And so, how does it continue? And that's kind of that generational connection that has been disconnected, and we are through this art practice trying to have a conversation about how to reconnect.
And just to close, we'd like to read the words of our elders, the Weweklatoli. The Weweklatoli, which means words of the elders, they're ancient proverbs from the Americas. And we were lucky enough to come across this one as we after we started our practice, and it seemed it resonated so much with us. And they're originally written in Nahuatl and translated into Spanish, and we translated them into English for you. Act, take care of the things of the earth. Do something, work the land, plant nopal, plant maguey. With that, you will have something to eat, to drink, to wear. With that, you will stand and be true. With that, you will walk. With that, they will speak of you, praise you. With that, you will be known.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That was fabulous. So let me pass you some mic. So thank you. As Shannon said at the beginning, I'm Lisa Le Feuvre, and I've got the incredible selfish honour of chairing, which basically means I can ask the first question. I have millions of questions I want to ask. I'm going to try and keep myself to 2. And then we'll open up and see if anyone wants to ask questions, be dissenting, contest, teach us things we don't know. And just to let you know, because we're recording and live streaming this talk, I will repeat back the questions just so that those who are not in the room with us can hear. So maybe I'll start with the most difficult question, because that's always a good way to go. One of the things that really struck me about your presentation, and one of the reasons why basically I love your work so much, is it seems that what you're really committed to, everything that you're doing, is undoing lazy assumptions. And I'm thinking about language, and I'm thinking about maps. Now, we know that maps are complete fictions. They always hold partialities, they always hold discrimination, and they always hold dismissal. Language is exactly the same. There's one word that you both use that I'm really fascinated by, weed. What is a weed? If we have a garden, if we have a backyard, we're fighting against the weeds. Well, who says these things are weeds? Who dismisses them in that way? And I think language and maps are right at the heart of this thing that art history calls land art. It's a term that I frown about a lot, but we can maybe go into that later. So I'd like you to tell us a bit more about maps, about language.
Yeah, so maps have been really instrumental in informing our perspective of land art. I think what we saw, or what I saw in a lot of the maps that I looked at early on in our practice was actually not us and not our experience. I didn't see us. And it was the same in the language, actually. We weren't there, we didn't exist. Even though we know that that's not true, because we are here. We are living proof that that's not true. So for me, that was really informative.
Yeah, and specifically with the Southwest, the maps, they are political, they are biased, and they depict a region that is unknown, that is foreign, and that is dangerous. And for us, our communities have been living here long before those maps were. So where were we? We were unknown, we're foreign, and so that was those maps were critical to us, and kind of unraveling where we would go as artists and how we would, some of them have great science in them. So that part was fun too, because there is some truth in them, but there's also a layer of politics. And that was it. That was exciting. We found that exciting.
I have a distinct memory of the map, and I can't remember which one it was, but it labeled the area of the Phoenix metro area as uninhabitable lands. And I thought, well, that's funny because my family's been living here for so many generations. That really struck a chord with me. And another thing that we found that has been really interesting through all the map studies that we've done is that, especially when looking at ecological maps, you see that the political borders, you can see that the ecological systems stop at the political borders. And so sometimes through our studies, we've seen that, and we're like, wow, so the ecology just stops right there. Interesting.
And then when into words, the word desert, we started really getting into that word. And the more we studied it, the more we realized they don't really exist outside of a colonial construct. They're not necessarily ecological zones as much as they are cultural projections of these areas. And that's why we use the word DesertArtLAB. We used it to kind of deconstruct the concept that we live in this so-called desert.
And one of the things that with the Cactus Growing Project and throughout all of your work is that you're looking at the landscape from an urban perspective. And you're finding these slivers of land that could be a medium that are overlooked, that are dismissed as being nothing. And yet, you talked about that first experiment of the landowner coming, giving you permission, and then saying, hold on a second, we don't want any of this cactus business. I'd like, could you tell us a little bit more about the land ownership? So these are dismissed pockets of land that are seen as being nothing, worthless, a waste of space, a waste of time, yet they're still owned. What is that relationship?
Well, one of the things that land management in the Southwest is you see this, and especially, you can go throughout the country to see these vacant lots, but the desert regions have a lot of them, and I think it really speaks to this idea that there's nothing, that the land is worth nothing, and that it's only worth something if you develop it, and that folks are sitting waiting on this worthless land until they can develop it, and they will wait decades. Some of that land in Phoenix was set vacant for 30, 40 years. If you go to those very locations, it got developed. It's gone. So now it's worth something. And we understood that this land could be valuable being what it was. And that's kind of what we wanted to do with our piece of worthless land.
What we also saw was this reoccurring idea that there's nothing here. And of course, when you strip everything, out of its environment, of course, there's nothing there. But how did we get to that place where there's nothing there and we're surrounded by nothingness? It was created, right? It wasn't always like that. We knew that. So that was also, I guess that was interesting for us too, this idea. And we knew that wasn't true,
There's a really great essay that I read over the summer by, I think it was Lisa Le Feuvre. She talks about this language of nothingness and wasteland. She argues that the use of this language is a programmatic, colonial and extra-colonial attempt to give this sense of there being nothing there, so that unjust powers can use the land for storing waste, for even more stripping this land of anything that it can be done with.
I mean, I often think the first nuclear weapon tested on Earth was done in New Mexico, in the desert regions. Why? Yeah, there's nothing there. And you think about the tests going on in Nevada for hundreds and hundreds of tests were done, and it speaks to this concept. When you devalue it to a point, you can do anything. And I think that's what we have seen in the deserts. And the desert ecologicals have face some of the most extreme ecological degradation and just stripping, because there's no value to it. Where we're at, we have these cholla. They are anchor plants to the ecological system. We've seen it. They are not valued. If anything, take them all out. We have junipers in our town, in our region. They're probably 1,000 years old. They will be cut down, and nobody will. And that's part of what we are trying to speak as the ecological space, but also the cultural connection and space to it that have also been devalued. So that was an important part of our process is that we are connected. Our histories are connected to these ecological spaces as the ecological spaces were devalued. So were we, and so were our community, our cultures, our practices.
I was going to just add that we started to see that, if there was a connection between the ecological space and the social space. And so nothing applied to the people who lived there, and it also applied to the ecologies that existed there. So.
There's one more question I'd like to ask before I open up to see, and hopefully you all want to join in this conversation. You talked about how growing these plants is literally healing the earth, and that a project like this, it takes time, long time. I really like if you could share a little bit more about how your project is also addressing food injustice as well.
Yeah, so we've thought a lot about this conversation because early on in our practice, we were involved in lots of community organizations that were developing gardens in low-income communities and Hispanic, Chicano, indigenous communities in South Phoenix. And they got a $50,000 grant to start a garden in this neighborhood. And then to find out later, oh, everyone's like, the community's they're just not, they don't want the kale, they don't want to eat healthy, right? And what we saw was this kind
Not interested in vegetables. These are the kind of things we would hear. And the part that was interesting on our side is April's uncle lived in one of those neighborhoods at the time. So we were in the institutional kind of conversation, but we also knew the local one.
And he was like, oh, they're teaching me how to grow all these new things, but I don't know what to do with them. He also was growing cactus in his backyard and had like his own garden. So he eats vegetables, I know that. He just didn't know what to do with those vegetables. And so
But there was this conflict. If we needed to eat the plants that the organization wanted them to eat, they didn't want vegetables and they weren't eating healthy. And so we were part of volunteering, and I thought, well, that's where DesertArtLAB started. I thought, well, we can try to change this organization. That's going to be, or we can create our own that's centered on our perspective. And there aren't very many, there really aren't. Even today, 10 years ago when we started this, there wasn't as much conversation about it. There wasn't a lot of support, believe it or not. Now the conversation's moved, really encouraging, it's moved on. There is a lot of support, but there's still not as many organizations as there needs to be.
And what we also learned was that actually we started to see, well, our communities, we know how to grow these gardens. We actually don't need $50,000 grant and sprinkler system and shade structure to grow our traditional foods. And so that was also really interesting because we could actually, speaking within the framework of food justice, we could create food justice by just allowing our communities to eat their traditional foods. And so that was.
Thank you. Is there something you might add? Yeah.
I was just really struck by the level of hostility towards communism, especially that one that are in Phoenix. And I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more about what you think about through the day. I mean, I know there's obviously you talked about the kind of negative feelings or anxiety about the desert, but is there something else in that as well?
So just to repeat, and this is a synopsis, I won't say it beautifully to you, the question is about the hostility to indigenous plants. Why is that happening? Where does that come from? And the person asking the question was really interested in, as I suspect all of us are, that story of the landowner saying, get this stuff off my land.
These structures are colonial structures. They are rooted in colonial concepts of ecology. So when you think of what a healthy ecology is, sometimes the thought is not a dry land. It's something with more moisture. It's something maybe looks like Western Europe. We are far, far from there. So a lot of it is rooted in this aesthetic of what a healthy ecological environment is. It's very powerful. Art history has had a huge role in this. I mean, if you Google beautiful landscape art, hey, there's been a lot of great things done in Santa Fe, but, likely you'll find some master who painted a landscape of Western Europe. And so these things, so then that is what a beautiful landscape is. And so a lot of it is rooted in colonial structure. And again, as Lisa mentioned, this idea of devaluing an area that you can extract from. the areas that we showed that were called the Great American Desert that followed the eastern slope of the Rocky Mountains that went through Colorado down through New Mexico, eventually it was no longer called the Great American Desert, and there's a reason why. There all of a sudden, valuable stuff was found over here. Extraction started, and all of a sudden it was not a desert anymore. It was a prairie. and so things change. And prairie is like a French word for grassland. For grass. Is grass. You go through our areas, there's grass, but it takes a lot of resources to keep that stuff going.
Yeah, Andrea.
I just wanted you all to talk a little bit more about things that I think are so interesting about the work, the self-determination aspects of the work. I think are so fascinating, especially in the fact that you grew plants for the exhibition that you had that I created, amaranth in particular. And when you talk about amaranth, growing amaranth, it's resistant to Roundup.
Yeah.
And you can talk about that being an act of self-determination. It was a symbol of self-determination. And one of these other really wonderful things that came out of this conversation is that book that you guys all referred to, and the act of, I hope you'll tell these people, the folks here, that quote about eating a bowl of chili and why that is an act of self-determination.
Right, yes, thank you, Andrea. So she's referring to, we mentioned Dr. Enrique Salomon's work earlier, but he wrote a book that we came across throughout our research called Eating the Landscape. And he talks about this idea of eating a bowl of green chili as an act of self-determination, because when you're eating your traditional foods, you're not only reinforcing your identity, but you're supporting the community that's growing the chilies, right? You're supporting an ecological system and an ecological practice. You're supporting generations of a practice that you're also allowing to survive, right, for the future. You're going to teach the future generations also how to eat that bowl of green chili as an act of self-determination. And so, his work has been so influential. I'll let Matt talk about the amaranth.
Yeah, the amaranth, I gotta put that back in the presentation. I think I forgot about that one. There's been a lot of work done on amaranth over the last few years, and there's, I don't know if any of you, some of you probably have studied this, but there's like a campaign to eradicate amaranth across the
It's
world.
also called pigweed.
And again, so there's different varieties of amaranth, and one of the reasons why it is under attack is that it interferes with industrial large-scale agriculture as a weed. And so, Roundup-ready products, chemicals, are basically created to stop this plant. And the idea is you can plant your seeds, right, Roundup, the seeds that are created by these biochemical companies. You can plant them and they're resistant to the Roundup. But the so-called weed, which in some cases is amaranth, is not. And so it kills the weed, no less labor, right? You just grow your plant, you don't have to worry about weeds. The issue is, so this is the thing, what do they call this so-called weed? Pigweed. It's amaranth, it's pigweed. And they call it pigweed. So what's happened though is that amaranth is tough. Amaranth's ancient. Amaranth's been in the Americas a very long time. It's a very resilient plant, and it has adapted resistance to Roundup. And so these companies are really, I haven't checked in on them lately, but at the time we made this body of work, they were, you're at the point where they're like, their stock's going down because they can't kill amaranth anymore. And so what we did is we found, and this is actually while I was at Kansas State University for a while, they have the so-called pigweed. And there's like a campaign against them. They have signs in the Midwest that say, no pigweed. And so we found seeds of it, and we grew it. And we grew it, and we exhibited it. And the thing is this is definitely not the ancient amaranth, right? This is an amaranth that's gone through chemical warfare. So this is a new kind of amaranth that is their survivor. And so to us, that speaks to all of this. you know, the survivors of these attempts to eradicate. And that's the experience we're talking about.
And if you don't know too much about the history of amaranth, but amaranth is an indigenous plant to the Americas, and it's a food that's popular, especially in Mesoamerica, and it was also used for ceremony. And when the Spanish came to the Americas, they realized the significance and the importance of this plant. They went on a campaign to eradicate amaranth because they were burning amaranth fields. There's no more amaranth. It was connected to religious practice, indigenous religious practice.
Self-determination, to food sovereignty, to all these things. There's been a 500-year war against amaranth. And no kidding. And these companies would be happy for it to just disappear off the face of the earth because it can resist their chemicals. And so yeah, we grew some and we put it up we still have those, yeah.
But for us and our histories here in the Southwest, family's generationally from Pueblo, northern New Mexico area, and my family's in the Sonoran Desert, both sides of the border, and we can really relate to the amaranth experience.
And of course, it can grow here. I have some in my backyard. There's, I think, 15 minutes walk from me. And so it's resistant through good mountain.
Now, the kind of amaranth that we're growing is a tough character. You know, you've got to imagine what it's gone through. So it is tough. And you know, it's not, you know, there's those amaranth pictures, if you Google it, they just look like fluffy little kind of like stuffed animals. You know? This one's not that. but it is very inspiring still.
Yeah.
I'll try to speak loud enough. Thank you for your presentation. I'm wondering what you imagine your work will be a generation from now, because that's probably a very hard question to answer, but I'm just thinking of, you know, you were talking about the kids waving dollar bills and you were on your, what was it, mobile, bike, mobile lab, and clearly the work that you're doing, the garden that you planted, you know, you're only 6-7 years in, and it's not really going to get its fullest for another generation. So what do you imagine your work is going to be like then when the ecology of this whole region is going to be larger, the desert's going to be bigger, the Americas? Do you have any idea?
Yeah, we think about that often. And there's so many ways that we go. I mean, sometimes I worry that the only little patch of healthy cholla left are going to be out of sight. You know, sometimes I think that. Not the only, but in our region. Because there's so much development going on. These things aren't valued. You know, there's housing being built everywhere in some of the most some air regions with untouched cholla fields. So sometimes I think, well, you know, what's going to be left of these things? Sometimes I hope that this is, you know, inspiration to value and promote and everybody else grow this stuff. You know, so we'll never know, but one thing we do know is what it took us 40 years to learn, our first grader and our sixth grader know. So that, and they really do, they know it. They know what it took us so long to learn, and so that right there is real to see that. And so that's really important. And actually, I'll share a story about this. Like a lot of places, our little town that hasn't had a lot of economic development for generations is really, you know, all of a sudden we have some, which is positive. Actually the marijuana industry has been a really good catalyst for that. And so people are moving there, people are buying houses. We have a new neighbor by our field site who came in about a year ago. He came from out of town, and almost immediately when he moved in, I got a letter to my door saying he wanted to buy my plot of land. You know, and I didn't just get a letter, I got an email, and then I got another email, and then I got another letter. And you know, I kind of thought about it, and I was talking to, you know, out loud to April, how much would we really sell that for? You know, just and my son, who's a sixth grader, said, there is no amount of money we could ever sell that for. Nothing. Maybe we could never sell it. And I thought, okay, this is working. But, so, that speaks to some of those optimistic parts of the process that we think in generation it could work.
I think when you think of it as a space for cultural preservation and an act of self-determination, we hope that space is being used in a way that allows people to access traditional foods again. Like I said earlier, some of these foods aren't available commercially and have traditionally been accessed through cultural practice. Not just going to the supermarket, but going to collect the fruits and knowing when it's time to collect them and having that relationship kind of going back to this idea of concentric ecological systems, having a relationship with these ecological systems as you would your family, knowing them intimately in that way. So we do hope that is thriving and that space is there to maintain the little that we do have left.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Matt, for sharing with such generosity and grace and generative for your ideas. We will pause now, not for a lack of things to say, but Rob needs lunch. And go out and do some planting, maybe. And so Shannon said at the start of today, we'll come back this afternoon for the second part. But I hope you all join with me for saying thank you for such an